Hey guys, so recently I provided a tier list by the data for overall best meta in rogue decks, but this time I wanted to focus specifically on the rogue decks. Now of course, it's not really a great time to play rogue decks just because, Snake Eye is just taking majority of the top cut, but at the same time, let's at least explore what other rogue decks have been topping and doing pretty well. And before we continue, definitely go check out those discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Sleeves as well as singles. Want to highlight that Card Brawlers, they do have their pre-orders up for the Battles of Legends set, so you can use code HAKUNA5 for 5% off. Definitely go check those out. Anyways, this was what the overall meta tier list by the data looked like when I posted this last week. So basically, for the purpose of this video, we're only going to be focusing on decks that are not in tier 1 and tier 2. So let's just start off the rogue tier list for this month, and we actually have Purrely at number 1. So this was kind of interesting because on Dueling Book at least, it looks like it's seeing a whole lot of play. I don't actually know why. Someone let me know if they do know the reason. Unfortunately, no real YCS top in the last month or so, but regional wise, it's been pretty decent. I mean, I guess maybe Purrely Noir is still enough to hold off in this current meta. We also have Yubel, which speaking of Battles of Legend, of course, the Phantom of Yubel is officially going to come out in that set, which is actually pretty big, especially for this deck. So definitely, I'm sure it will improve in terms of competitive success and just in terms of its overall power. No YCS top post Legacy of Destruction, but I'm sure maybe we'll see that soon enough. Then we do have Tearlaments. I had already mentioned this a while back in terms of, there were some Paleozoic variants as well that's topped, but also recently there was a Lightsworn version that topped as well, which is really cool to see. I think especially, moving forward, maybe Shifter does get banned finally if we do get this ban list. And speaking of ban lists, also, you should fill out that ban list prediction survey that I have. You can check that out in my community post, and then I'll have that video up soon as well. And then lastly, in the A tier, we also have Chimera. So this has been doing pretty decent actually. And whether it's with Melodious or not, I think it's, I'm actually going to feature a PAL version that did top an LA regional with Chimera, which is pretty impressive because those regionals get pretty big. So definitely stay tuned for that. And I think from a budget standpoint, it's actually pretty good, except for maybe some of the newer illusion stuff. And then we have Centur-Ion. This has also been a very nice little contender. Unfortunately, no YCS top, but you know what? Still, regional level wise, doing really well. Calamity Lock is still a thing. It's still very strong if they can pull it off. And in terms of synchro kind of strategies, so you've already seen some other tops featuring Centur-Ion package, for example, with like Lightsworn, with like Vanadium. They've been kind of combining the two on that have topped as well, so pretty interesting to see as well. So next we have Flunder. This is kind of surprising that it's not doing as well even at a rogue standpoint, just because of how strong Shifter is, especially in a format with Snake Eye, but unfortunately just hasn't had that much competitive success. And who knows, if Shifter does get banned, then this deck will definitely take a big step back, not only from the fact that it's not going to be able to banish as easy anymore, but it also just loses a lot harder to draw now. Then you also have Rika, Sun Avalon, or Romage, whatever, with all the new support. This is also done pretty well regional level wise. They're usually like pile decks now from what I'm seeing, but unfortunately no YCS top so far. But you know what, we do have like the European WCQ happening in like a month, and I'm sure it will probably top that again. And then we have Spright. This has definitely fallen off quite hard compared to, in its tier 1 days. I was like at one point very strong in the best deck, but really those times have flown by, and it's already approaching essentially 2 years now with Spright and Tearlaments coming out of Power of the Elements. But there's different versions of Spright, like Runic for Hire with maybe with Melfi. That's sort of the quote-unquote pure way. There's with like Live Twin, whether with Runic or not. So there's definitely various ways to play it. They're actually getting reprinted as well in the Battles of Legends set, which is kind of nice to see because Spright Blue, I believe, was not reprinted outside of the Ulti since its original printing. So you know what, I think it can be a very solid and very consistent rogue choice, and it can also play a lot of non-engine as well. And then we have Lightsworn, kind of like the original Tearlaments, really. And speaking of Tearlaments, of course, as I mentioned, it does go hand in hand with Tears in terms of just being able to mill things, fuse things. And also, I mentioned about with Centur-Ion as well. And of course, Runic Lightsworn is also another potential option as well, just to be able to mill some of your Runic spells and just easier way to get draw 3 off the field spell. So I think it's really cool. It's very popular online right now as well. And it's kind of like one of the more popular legacy decks that I'm just glad that it actually is getting some kind of competitive success. And then you have Vanadium. This has, at least in the most recent weeks, have at least done some tops here and there. No YCS level success, unfortunately, but you know what, I think it still can be pretty scary when it gets to go first. And of course, Droll is not really seeing much play anymore, especially in the main deck, so that is something that's at least a positive for Vanadium. And then we also have Vanquish Soul. This, at least in the last week or two, at least caught a couple more tops, because at the beginning of the Legacy Destruction format, really just did not see any play. I mean, it can also play Shifter, but as you saw with like Flunder, even these kind of strong shifter decks, not really doing that amazing anyways. Of course, Tempai can play shifter too, but they don't really play that optimally under it, at least compared to something like Flunder. So Vanquish Soul kind of definitely taking a step back, but I mean, at least there's going to be a nice little Vanquish Soul playmat for the WCQ, so that's something to look forward to for those Vanquish Soul players. And then you have Rescue Ace. Really weird to say that this is a rogue deck nowadays, especially this far down, just because of how strong it can be, especially with all the other kind of fire decks out there. But I guess compared to those fire decks, you know, that's definitely taken a step back, even in comparison to something like Salamangreat, which is another fire deck that's actually been doing pretty well, and not in this video because they're essentially counted as tier 2 at this point. They actually have a pretty good amount of toss. But Rescue Ace, I think, from a pure strength standpoint, just having a combination of back row interruptions as well as monster interruptions, I think it's a very strong rogue deck, but of course, definitely not cheap either. So next we have Unchained, which of course, from a pure standpoint, really not as popular as you would see as kind of like a package in something like Yubel, maybe sometimes even Labyrinth as well. I did recently provide a pure Unchained deck profile that did top, so you can go check that out as well. And then Sky Striker, this typically sees a whole lot of play online on Dueling Book and usually kind of tends to make it to these lists because of that. But you know what? It actually still got another, I believe, national top as well. I haven't really seen the list floating around yet, but at least they got something. And you know what? They're getting some support in Battles of Legend as well. I believe they're not getting everything though that was kind of announced already in terms of like the OCG. So that's a little too bad. But you know what? I'm sure with Engage at 3 as well, you're probably going to see at least some people try to top any WCQ or European WCQ or whatever other WCQs out there with Striker. And then you have Dragon Link. This obviously has fallen off a lot, although the play of Bestials in the side, as you would see in some of the top cut breakdowns that I've been doing, they are actually pretty popular, so at least Dragon Link has that kind of advantage. But you know, losing something like Savage, let's say even Barone, that I'm sure would kind of hurt. I actually recently provided a Dragon Link deck profile that topped the regional as well, that you can check out as well. And then you have Drytron. This actually did top a regional and a national in the last few weeks, and both of them, they were not featuring any voiceless voice cards or anything, so that's pretty impressive. One was playing the Mayakashi lock, the other was not, just like your typical vanity ruler kind of thing. So you know what, going first, I think, especially again with Droll not being really in the mix, at least especially in the main deck, I think that's a pretty good time for a deck like, you know, Drytron, decks like Dark World, where if they get to go first, even if they are a rogue deck, it's extremely scary. And then we also have Virtual World. This is a deck that I also featured recently because it won Spanish Nationals actually, and it also topped another National, I believe. So hey, at least from a rogue standpoint, it's doing kind of holding its own again. It's seen some tops here and there since the last, I guess, half a year or so. In particular, both of those decks that did top, they were playing Skill Drain, which this deck has been known to play around pretty well, because back when Virtual World was tier 1 a few years ago, something like Imperm for the first time was just not a good hand trap against a deck like this, and Imperm actually saw a very big decline in play back in like those top cut breakdowns that I did. So you know what, Skill Drain, very strong right now. It's unfortunate that it's popular, but at least as a rogue deck, you know, it can make very good use of it and hanging in there. So next we have Swordsoul, which actually did top a regional recently, so super impressive. I was looking at the list, so it was also, of course, as expected, playing like the Protoss lock. But you know, for the most part, outside of that, I think Swordsoul lists are usually pretty standard. And the good thing about Swordsoul is that it's usually pretty cheap as well, because they're extra deck, because especially they're typically like Wormlock, they don't play anything expensive like SP or Typhon, for example. So I think from a budget standpoint, this is always something that I recommend, at least in terms of, and you know, it had some competitive success recently. And then finally, we also have Dynamorphia. This is another one that I featured on a channel recently. I top 4'd at a remote regional, so you can certainly go check that out as well, the deck list. And there was another one that topped, I believe, a national or regional very recently, and they basically play something like 12 plus counter traps, which is pretty interesting to see. Definitely one of the weirder decks where they just constantly try to pay half their life, essentially. It just gets really weird situation. Like at one point, they'll be at like 13 life points, and they'll still find a way to beat you and outgrind you. So definitely not the most fun deck to play against in a way, I guess, because it just feels really weird, and they kind of have like a Mystic Mine as a boss monster, but nonetheless pretty interesting. And then finally we have Marincess, which of course you can never sleep on them. They tend to kind of top here and there kind of consistently. So I believe they actually had 2 tops in the same national in Slovenia. So it's respectable. I think at least from a cyber strategy, you know, obviously MathMech has completely died out following the ban of Circular. Salamangreat actually is doing, of course, as I mentioned earlier, really well. And so Marincess at least is also still kind of hanging in there. They were kind of known as like water salads back when they first came out, back in I think like 2019. So I'm glad to see that it still gets consistent success here and in there. Alright guys, so that was it for the Rogue tier list for this month. Hopefully you found that interesting. I know it's a little bit of a rough time to play any kind of Rogue deck right now, but you know what, just hang in there. I'm sure hopefully we get another ban list at some point, and I'm sure at this point they should finally knock off Snake Eye for good. Let's just hope at the very least. So again, you can go check out that balance prediction survey. It'll be on my community tab. I'll have that video out probably by this weekend. And anyways, huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons and sponsors as always for the continued support, and well, take care guys.